I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The argument had been building behind palace doors for weeks, but when King Charles finally spoke, there was no room left for negotiation. Meghan's attempt to secure control of a royal patronage associated with Catherine had reached the sovereign himself, and his response was brutally simple: Catherine keeps it. What sounded like a dispute over one ceremonial role suddenly became something far more dangerous. A test of loyalty, hierarchy, and who still possessed influence inside the monarchy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew the decision would cut deeper than a routine palace ruling. The patronage was not simply an honorary name attached to a charity. A royal patronage is a formal relationship in which a family member publicly supports an organization and lends it royal visibility. Catherine had spent years building trust around that responsibility, supporting campaigns, and allowing the cause to become tied to her duty. That history made the challenge deeply personal. The king ended the uncertainty himself. Meghan had formally sought control of the role through a prepared proposal, and Charles rejected the attempt, ordering that Catherine remain fully attached to it. When the princess received confirmation in private, she did not celebrate. She sat with the message, then told William that relief did not erase the sting of learning. Her work had been treated as something transferable. The prince understood. This was no longer paperwork. It was family. Meghan reacted differently. When she learned that Charles had intervened personally, anger replaced expectation, because the refusal carried the weight of a deliberate royal boundary. The decision had not come from a junior office. It had come from the monarch. In a documented palace account prepared for senior staff, her response was described as immediate. She wanted to know why the request had advanced so far if the answer was already decided. Charles then closed the briefing folder in front of the aide opposite him. He said the matter was finished, but ordered every piece of correspondence connected to the request preserved. That instruction changed the mood. William later discovered why. Meghan's approach had not begun with one casual inquiry. A structured proposal had moved through several royal offices, carrying arguments, suggested responsibilities, and a pathway for transfer. That was the detail nobody could ignore. Charles had ended the claim in a single decision. But the proposal behind Meghan's move revealed something far more troubling. This confrontation had started long before Catherine knew she was being challenged, and the next question was unavoidable. Who had allowed Meghan to believe the patronage might ever become hers? Behind the official language were three people carrying very different wounds. Catherine saw the patronage as years of trust and quiet work. Meghan saw something she believed could restore royal relevance and legitimacy. Charles saw a monarchy already strained by family division, suddenly facing another contest over boundaries. None of them was fighting only over a title on a letterhead. Each was defending something far more personal, and that made compromise almost impossible. Catherine had never treated the role as a decorative attachment. She had built relationships through private meetings, repeated public engagements, and years of patient support for the organization's mission. A royal patronage, in simple terms, is a formal link between a member of the royal family and a cause that benefits from that person's public backing. For her, that connection had become part of how she understood service itself. When she spoke privately with William, the hurt finally surfaced. She told the prince that what troubled her most was not ambition, but the idea that years of trust could be moved from one person to another, as though none of it had mattered. Meghan carried a different wound. After stepping away from frontline royal duties, a respected royal-linked role represented more than visibility. It offered a possible route back toward institutional relevance, without fully returning to the old structure. She told Harry in a recorded private conversation, later summarized for advisors, that the refusal felt like proof the palace still judged her through previous conflict rather than what she believed she could contribute now. Harry listened, and his frustration sharpened because he heard the decision as another reminder that their relationship with the institution had never truly reset. Charles felt the pressure from both directions. One internal assessment warned that giving Meghan access could reopen questions about representation, branding, and whether someone outside active royal service could formally speak through a crown-linked role. Another warned that a hard refusal could deepen the family rupture and place Harry back into open conflict with his father. The king read both assessments carefully, because the stakes were larger than one charity. He was being asked to choose between institutional clarity and the fragile hope of family peace. William finally raised the question nobody wanted to say aloud. In a private conversation with Charles, the future king asked whether Meghan's request was really about charitable service at all, or whether the patronage had become a symbol of something bigger. The monarch did not answer immediately. That silence unsettled the prince more than any speech could have, because it suggested his father already suspected the same thing. That silence pointed backward. To understand why Meghan pushed the matter so far, the story had to return to an earlier royal encounter. The moment when a vague possibility hardened into a belief that Catherine's patronage might truly become hers. Every palace crisis has a moment that looks harmless, until history turns back toward it. Months before Charles issued his final order, one conversation created the misunderstanding that would eventually divide the family again. It happened after a charity reception, when Meghan heard a senior royal advisor discussing future patronage restructuring. Catherine's name was mentioned. So was the possibility of redistributing responsibilities. Meghan left that evening believing a door had opened. The palace believed nothing had been promised. Meghan had been looking for a meaningful way to reconnect with high-profile charitable work in Britain, without returning fully to traditional royal duties. Royal patronages can sometimes be reviewed when workloads, family roles, or public responsibilities change, which means even an informal comment about restructuring can carry enormous weight. For her, that possibility felt like a path back toward relevance. For the palace, it was routine language. That difference in interpretation would become dangerous. The turning point came after a Windsor charity reception. Meghan approached a senior advisor privately and asked whether Catherine's patronage could ever be transferred during an upcoming review of responsibilities. The advisor answered carefully, saying that every arrangement is reviewed. She heard possibility in those words. The advisor meant process. Meghan left believing she had been given enough encouragement to move forward, and from that moment, the issue stopped being hypothetical. Days later, Meghan's representatives requested detailed briefing material on the patronage's history, funding relationships, and public profile. That request changed everything. What had begun as one ambiguous exchange now looked like a formal pursuit. The palace response immediately became colder, and she noticed it. Messages grew shorter. Questions were redirected. Access to information slowed. Meghan read that shift as deliberate obstruction, and the frustration deepened because she believed the institution was retreating from something it had already allowed her to explore. Catherine learned about the request later, and the discovery struck harder than she expected. She had spent years building trust around that work, yet discussions about its possible transfer had happened before anyone had spoken to her directly. The princess told William in a documented private account that she felt less threatened by the ambition itself than by the silence surrounding it. The prince understood why. She was being asked to defend something she had never been told was under consideration. That realization ended any chance of handling the matter through paperwork alone. Catherine insisted that Meghan speak to her directly. No more messages. No more advisors interpreting intentions. The paperwork had created the crisis, but the coming conversation between the two women would strip away every layer of royal politeness and expose what each of them truly believed they were entitled to protect. There were no cameras, no microphones, and almost no witnesses when Catherine and Meghan finally confronted the dispute directly. The conversation began politely. It did not stay that way. Catherine wanted to know why her work had been discussed without her. Meghan wanted to know why a charitable role should belong permanently to one person. Then came the sentence that changed the emotional temperature of the room. Catherine told her plainly that this was not hers to take. Catherine had requested the meeting because the messages passing between aides had become colder, sharper, and more difficult to interpret. She wanted direct clarification, not another carefully worded exchange through palace staff. A royal patronage, meaning an official relationship in which a member of the family supports a charitable organization, was never simply a name beside a cause for her. It represented years of meetings, trust, and personal commitment. She told Meghan that those relationships could not be treated like property, waiting to be reassigned. Meghan pushed back. She argued that royal responsibilities had always changed when family roles evolved, and she questioned why tradition seemed flexible in some moments, but suddenly rigid when her own involvement was being discussed. She reminded Catherine that Charles had not yet issued his final ruling, meaning the decision was still open. The princess heard the challenge clearly. This was no longer about misunderstanding. It was about whether years of service could be outweighed by a new claim. The tension hardened. Meghan placed her notes on a side table and asked the question directly. Did Catherine believe she should never again hold a significant British royal role? The princess paused before answering, choosing her words with care. She said the issue was not whether Meghan could ever serve again. The issue was whether trust could be rebuilt by taking something another person had spent years creating. Meghan went quiet, but the silence did not bring agreement. It only exposed how differently the two women understood fairness. Catherine finally stood first. That simple movement ended the negotiation. She had entered hoping the conflict could still be contained between them, but she now believed only one person could settle it. Immediately afterward, she asked William to speak with Charles and give him a direct account of what had happened. The prince agreed because he understood that allowing advisors to keep filtering the dispute would only make the damage worse. The women had reached an impasse, and once William carried Catherine's account to his father, the question stopped being personal preference. It became royal authority, and Charles was about to decide whether loyalty, precedent, or family peace would carry the greater weight. Charles now faced a decision with consequences far beyond one charity. If patronages could be claimed through pressure, the monarchy risked turning years of service into negotiable territory. But if he rejected Meghan too harshly, another family dispute could explode into public view. The king's problem was no longer deciding who deserved the role. It was deciding what precedent he was willing to create, and what kind of monarchy he intended to leave behind. Charles called for a tighter review. He asked his private secretary and legal advisors to separate Catherine's personal bond with the organization from the Crown's formal authority over royal assignments. A royal patronage is not inherited property. It depends on personal appointment, institutional approval, the charity's acceptance, and ultimately the sovereign's authority over who formally represents the monarchy. That distinction mattered, because Catherine had built the relationship, but the institution still controlled the structure around it. The pressure became personal almost immediately. William had already made clear that he believed his wife's years of work should not be treated as a vacancy waiting to be filled. Harry, meanwhile, was expected to see a refusal as another judgment against Meghan, rather than a narrow decision about royal service. Charles understood both sons would read his ruling emotionally. One would see protection, the other could see rejection. That was the trap. Charles remained alone after the briefing and reread a short handwritten note from Catherine, explaining why the work mattered to her. She wrote about trust built slowly, relationships that could not be recreated by decree, and the danger of making service look interchangeable. The king set the note down without speaking. For a moment, the institutional question disappeared, and what remained was a father weighing one family wound against another. The review then delivered its hardest conclusion. No operational reason existed to remove Catherine, and no documented palace commitment had ever promised Meghan the patronage. More importantly, advisors warned that transferring the role could blur whether someone outside active royal service was formally speaking with crown authority. Charles now had both the emotional argument and the institutional one pointing in the same direction. That left only the decision. The monarch prepared a final written instruction confirming Catherine's position and closing the route to transfer. Meghan was about to discover that the refusal would not be softened into ambiguity, delayed into negotiation, or hidden behind aides. He knew delay would invite another challenge, so the final order had to be unmistakable, personal, and impossible to reinterpret later. The review had removed every technical excuse for compromise. What remained was Charles's willingness to say no and accept whatever family consequences followed. The answer arrived without ceremony. No extended negotiation, no softened language. Catherine would retain the patronage, her existing authority would continue unchanged, and no transfer would be considered. For Catherine, the decision brought relief. For Meghan, it felt like a door being slammed shut by the king himself. And for Harry, the refusal reopened an older anger, the belief that, whenever Meghan collided with palace tradition, the institution would always choose the institution. Charles had made certain there could be no confusion. His instruction moved through the relevant royal offices with one clear direction. Catherine's position was to remain untouched. The charity also received reassurance that its existing relationship with the Princess of Wales would continue without disruption. That mattered, because a royal patronage is built on continuity and trust, not simply a name attached to an organization. Any sudden transfer could unsettle years of relationships and turn charitable work into a family battlefield. Catherine read the confirmation beside William and stayed quiet for several seconds. She finally told the prince that she had never wanted the matter to reach his father. William answered that allowing it to continue would have been worse, because silence had already allowed confusion to grow. The princess understood his point, but relief came mixed with sadness. She had kept the role, yet the victory felt hollow because it had required the king to draw a line through another family dispute. Meghan received the refusal during a private call. She listened without interrupting, then went completely silent. After a pause, she asked for the wording to be read again, slowly. When it was repeated, she ended the conversation abruptly. The rejection hurt, because it no longer felt like hesitation from palace staff. It was Charles speaking through formal authority, and she understood that the door had been closed deliberately. Harry reacted almost immediately. He contacted Charles and demanded to know whether his wife had ever been seriously considered or whether the process had been designed to end in rejection from the beginning. The king refused to reopen the decision. He explained in a recorded conversation later summarized for senior aides that the issue was no longer Meghan's ability or ambition. It was about respecting existing commitments, clear boundaries, and the difference between active royal service and work carried out independently. That answer only deepened the fracture. Harry heard finality where his father intended clarity, while Charles knew another argument would change nothing. Yet one conversation still remained unfinished. The king and Catherine had not spoken alone about what this dispute had exposed inside the family. The official battle was over, but its emotional meaning would only become clear when he finally sat across from her, without advisors, secretaries, or protocol between them. After weeks of legal language, palace briefings, and family tension, the decisive conversation was remarkably simple. Charles asked Catherine to meet him alone. No aides, no advisors, no discussion papers. He wanted her to hear the reasoning from him. What followed was not a victory speech but something more personal. An acknowledgement that the monarchy could not demand years of loyalty from someone and then treat that loyalty as disposable the moment another family dispute became inconvenient. Charles had deliberately waited until the formal ruling was complete. He wanted the institutional process separated from the human conversation, because procedure could settle ownership of the role, but it could not repair the damage surrounding it. Catherine entered expecting reassurance about the patronage, yet the king quickly made clear that he wanted to discuss something deeper. A formal royal ruling is simply an official decision made through the monarch's authority, but this meeting was about what had happened before that ruling became necessary. Catherine finally admitted what had hurt most. Meghan's interest in the role had surprised her, but the deeper wound came from discovering that conversations about her work had taken place before anyone approached her directly. She told Charles that she had never expected years of trust to become something she might suddenly have to defend. The monarch listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he acknowledged that palace machinery had allowed the matter to travel too far before reaching the person most affected by it. Charles did not soften his answer. He told Catherine that transferring the patronage under pressure would have damaged more than her position. It would have sent a message that continuity could be broken whenever family tension became uncomfortable. The king admitted that he had considered the risk of angering Harry and deepening Meghan's resentment, but he believed the monarchy could not protect itself by sacrificing the very people who had remained steady within it. Catherine understood then that his decision had not been about choosing one woman over another. It had been about defending a principle. Catherine surprised him with her response. She said she did not want the ruling used to humiliate Meghan, nor did she want victory language surrounding it. The princess wanted the role protected, not another family war intensified. Charles agreed immediately. He promised that the palace would present the outcome with restraint, confirming continuity without turning rejection into spectacle. That private understanding changed what came next. The king and Catherine had settled the emotional question between them, but outside those walls the story was already beginning to spread. Their restraint would soon collide with headlines, television debates, and public judgment, and the monarchy would have to survive a far louder verdict beyond the palace gates. Once the story broke, nuance disappeared almost instantly. What had been a complicated fight over service, precedent, and family trust was reduced to 4 explosive words: Catherine keeps it. Within hours, television panels were debating loyalty. Newspapers were framing the decision as a royal showdown, and supporters of both women were treating the patronage like a symbol of something much larger. The palace had prevented an internal transfer. It could not prevent the public from turning that decision into a verdict. Catherine felt the shift immediately. Palace officials confirmed only that she remained attached to the patronage and that no change to her position was planned. But the public conversation moved far beyond that careful wording. A palace confirmation is simply an official statement, clarifying the monarchy's position. Yet this one did little to calm the frenzy. Commentators split sharply. Some called the outcome normal continuity. Others argued that Meghan's route back into formal royal structures had now been effectively closed. The reaction became impossible to ignore the next morning. A major newspaper ran Catherine's photograph beneath the giant headline, "Catherine keeps it. King ends patronage row," while television crews gathered outside Buckingham Palace and read the words live to viewers. William watched the coverage with growing concern. The princess told him that she hated being presented as the winner of a family battle because the charitable work itself was disappearing beneath the spectacle. The prince agreed, warning that celebration could easily turn service into revenge. Meghan experienced the same coverage very differently. She saw the headlines as humiliating, especially when several commentators described Charles's ruling as a direct personal rebuke. In a documented private account later shared with advisors, She said the language made it appear as though she had attempted to seize something that never belonged in discussion. Harry understood her anger, and he feared the public narrative was becoming harsher than the decision itself. For both of them, the humiliation now felt larger than the original request. Charles refused to escalate. The king instructed palace staff not to brief against Meghan, not to mock the failed attempt, and not to encourage stories portraying Catherine as victorious over another family member. That restraint reflected the private agreement he had already reached with the princess. She wanted the patronage protected, not weaponized. He wanted the ruling respected, not turned into another campaign of family destruction. That choice changed the meaning of the crisis. Catherine had every opportunity to embrace the language of victory, but she rejected it. The headlines had chosen winners and losers, yet the final verdict would not be written by the loudest front page. It would be written by what Charles, Meghan, William, and Catherine did after the confrontation ended, and by whether service or resentment defined the chapter that followed. In the end, Charles' decision settled more than ownership of one royal responsibility. Catherine kept the patronage, but she also kept something harder to protect: the principle that years of service cannot simply be erased by pressure, ambition, or family politics. Meghan lost the claim, yet the deeper consequence was not public humiliation. It was recognition that royal influence now came with boundaries she could no longer cross, and Charles had finally made those boundaries unmistakably clear. Catherine returned to the work without changing its mission or treating the outcome like a personal victory. The patronage remained what it had always been for her: a long-term commitment built through trust, repeated contact, and public responsibility. A royal patronage is a formal relationship between a royal figure and an organization, but the real value comes from consistency over time. She understood that protecting that relationship mattered more than celebrating the fact that Meghan's attempt had failed. Across the distance, Meghan reached the same practical conclusion from another direction. She abandoned the claim and shifted her charitable ambitions toward projects that did not depend on formal royal authority. Catherine later told William, in a documented private conversation, that the dispute had changed how she understood palace loyalty. She had once believed steady work would speak for itself. Now she knew that relationships sometimes had to be defended openly before silence allowed somebody else to redefine them. The prince understood why that realization mattered. His wife had kept the role, but she had also learned that duty did not protect itself simply because it had been performed faithfully. Charles carried a quieter burden. He knew Harry would resent the decision and that Meghan might always see it as another closed door. Yet the king accepted something uncomfortable. Avoiding family anger could never become the governing principle of the monarchy. If every difficult decision were softened to prevent resentment, authority itself would become meaningless. He had chosen continuity, even knowing that choice would hurt. Charles made that meaning clear at Catherine's next engagement connected to the patronage. Before she left, he spoke to her briefly and told her to continue exactly as she had. The princess answered with a quiet, "Thank you." Nothing more was needed. The matter was never reopened. Meghan's failed claim ultimately strengthened Catherine's position, because it proved that her authority rested on work, trust, continuity, and direct sovereign backing, rather than favoritism. The monarchy emerged with a hard but clear lesson: royal roles could not become prizes in family disputes. Catherine kept the patronage because she had built the relationship and remained accountable to it. Charles's intervention confirmed that service carried weight, boundaries mattered, and stability had to come before personal pressure. There was nowhere else for the conflict to go. Catherine kept the patronage. Meghan's claim ended. Charles's boundary stood, and the monarchy closed the chapter with loyalty, not rivalry, as the principle that ultimately prevailed. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.